I worked for the Army 25 years, and I want to talk about inefficiency. And I want to talk about one specific case that to me is the most clear-cut example of government waste and inefficiency. So the deal is, I was working for, of course the Army is very big, as the federal government's even bigger, of course. And I was working for just a kind of a subset of a subset of a subset, you might say. And the Army tries to make, in the area I was, they try to run it like a business. And so you kind of have to make money. When you spend money, you know, you have to, it's got to be in your budget, stuff like that. So this example that I'm going to talk about is an example where they bought a machine, $460,000 machine, never used. Now, I remember the number because it was less than $500,000, but it was more than $450,000. It's $460,000. This machine was never used. So I'll tell you a little bit about the little subset I was involved in was making parts for for Army materials, and they were kind of trying a new thing. And the Army, they wanted to have what they call organic, so they want to have a supply, in-house supply. So they were making these parts, and they'd set up all this machinery and equipment to make these parts, and they were making them. Now they had a customer. The customer was the Army, or another subset of the Army, and the customer wanted these parts made the way they were making them. But there was one engineer that wanted to do something different. It would be faster and less expensive. The only problem was the customer knew about it, and they didn't want it done that way. Well, this engineer, he must have talked the customer into letting him try, and he talked management into it, and they bought the machine, and they ran a test. They set up the machine. It's a very specific machine. It wasn't a general purpose, although it could have been used for other things, but it was very specifically set up for this task and to make this part, and actually to do work on the part, not even to make the entire part, just to do some work on shaping it. So the customer paid for a test $50,000. Now, I don't think this generally happens in private business. This is one of the places where it's different. There's a little bit of, how do you want to say it? Children, parents and children kind of like. So anyway, so they ran this test, and they operated the machine, and they produced the parts. They modified the parts. And then the customer inspected them. He says, no, we don't want to do it this way, which is what they said from the very beginning. So this machine was never used. That's my story. Now I could go, since I'm rolling, I'll go ahead and say a little more maybe. Because there's a lot more. There was several machines. Well, I'll give you another example of machines that was never used. And this all has to be defended in paperwork. So there was 3 TIG machines. They had 3 TIG machines, and they had 6 welders, and they had jobs to use the TIG machines. So they set up this claim that this defense of buying 3 TIG machines, that is to say a tungsten welding, I forget what it stands for, to be honest with you. But it's kind of a somewhat sophisticated welding machine. And they're, of course, high dollar. They're expensive commercial units, not your home variety. I don't know how much they costed. And what I want to say is they set up this defense buying these TIG machines, and they said they got 3 TIG machines and 6 welders. So they said there's 3 welders doing nothing while the other 3 are using the TIG machines. So you add up all the wages of those 3 welders doing nothing, and that comes up to kind of a lot of money, particularly if you stretch it out over a year. So and then that gets you what you call your payback. So if you buy your 3 more TIG welding machines, then all 6 welders can weld, and they all 6 are producing parts, and so you're making money. So you're paying for the 3 new TIG machines that way. And often it would pay off in a year. It wouldn't be surprising, you know, if you do it that way, you know. And you'd probably neglect a lot of consumables and this and that, downtime and everything else. But anyway, the major thing that was neglected was they didn't have a job that ran that long and would run in the future. Those 3 TIG machines were never, they never took the shrink wrap off of them. They come in on pallets shrink wrapped, and they sit there. They never took the shrink wrap off. Now, I'll say one other little bit more. These were Army machines. They belonged to the Army. The subset of the Army bought them, as I say, ostensibly to use them. But they never ceased, you know, they belonged to the Army from the beginning to the end. Now what would have happened, and they were eventually turned back to the Army, given back to the Army. I don't know exactly what happened to them, where they went. They were put up for auction, so to speak, and somebody else took them. And it was kind of funny how they did it, because they would call it depreciation. So the Army would buy the units up front, and then every year the subset that had physical possession of the TIG machines and wanted to buy them in the first place would do what they called depreciation. Now it wasn't really depreciation because they didn't pay any taxes, but what it was an installment plan. So they would pay for the machines out of their budget in the installments plan, so to speak. So anybody else, if they wanted to give up the machine, the other subset of the Army would just pick up the payment plan, so to speak. And I don't know about that. That one machine was very specialized, but somebody took it. They gave all that stuff away because the whole thing collapsed. There was also a big press, and the press is more of a general purpose machine. Anything you want to bend. And generally speaking, it's just the amount of force required. But there's other factors, but it's more of a general purpose machine than this first one I was talking about. So that was never used either. I don't know how, I think that was like $170,000. And it was the same engineer who incidentally got promoted. And he bragged to me at one point, he says, the way I've got this written up, it's going to pay for itself in 6 months. Well, they never used it. And I like to say, people say, oh, this tool will pay for itself. No, you have to use the tool. And I'm talking when you get into remodeling too. You buy a new tool, it doesn't pay for itself. You have to work that tool. And together, you and the tool pay for the tool. But anyway, they actually had a job where they were pressing steel, and they had contracted it out. And these pieces of steel, it was armor plate, was coming back like a Pringles. They would just nest them. They were curved, and they would just be nested like this. Boom, boop, 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 boop. All the same. And they didn't want to give up that success and try and do it themselves. They knew if they tried to use that press themselves and press it themselves, they would have and scrap and various problems. Boy, there's another one I just thought of too that was never used. I think this was the same engineer that bought this stuff. And it was Metaphoto, what they call Metaphoto. And the funny part of it is, when I was younger, I had a job doing that Metaphoto. So I knew how to do it. Basically, it's a photographic process on anodized aluminum. And so it's got the photographic chemicals old-fashioned like a film. It's got the chemicals in the aluminum. Anodized means it's got holes in it. So it goes in those little holes, and then you expose it, and then you boil the plate, and it seals, and so you can put gasoline on it. You can use it for name plates on a machine, and the gasoline and oil won't take the image off. Well, they bought this equipment, and they had bought better equipment than I ever used. It was more, how do you want to say it, automated. But I still knew how it worked. And I actually went through, tried to set up a place. You need water, and there was this one shower area that wasn't being used. I proposed setting it up there and drew up a plan for that. And I drew up 2 plans. I don't remember the other one, but both was rejected. And then at one point, somebody said, well, maybe we should set this up because we're paying, I think they were paying like $80,000 for somebody else to make this Metaphoto, the same thing. And so that came up, and it was rejected. Once again, probably because they were contracting that out, it was being successful, and they knew if they set this up, it cost money to run the machines. They probably have rejects, although this process was pretty straightforward. And I knew how to do it. And I told them that, you really don't have to hire anybody to do this, because I know how to do it. Rejected. Never used that equipment. And then, as a matter of fact, I believe that was $76,000. I went looking for it because they were giving stuff away because it all collapsed. The whole business side of it collapsed, so to speak. And me and another guy, well, first I says, whatever happened to that stuff? Well, I don't know. Well, me and another guy, we kind of hunted it down. At one point it was stored somewhere and the ceiling collapsed. So they moved it. And we never did find where it went or when it went, or, but it probably went to Army. There was some theft that would happen. And generally if they caught you stealing, you would be fired. That was one of the things you could get fired for. The other was drinking on the job or drugs in your system. When they did a piss test. But anyway, what I was going to say is, there was some stealing that went on. But it really was, most of it was never caught. And there wasn't a lot of it either, I don't believe. I didn't think there was much stealing that happened. Well, you got paid pretty well. As I say, you could get fired if you were caught. People didn't want to lose those jobs. They had a lot of benefits, and you didn't have to work very hard, So, but there was things that, I remember, what was that? There was a small machine. One thing was, if it would fit in your car, there was a better, easier. So a lot of this stuff was big, But there was, I think it was a laser cutter. One of them portable laser cutters. And of course they always buy 2 or 3 of them. And one day they were talking about they needed a laser cutter. And I says, well, we've got that. And I went looking for it, and a couple of us looked for it, and they said, well, it was sitting on this shelf. It was sitting on this shelf, I remember. And, it's not there. And I believe that got stolen. But there was like 2 or 3 of them, like I say. Mostly, mostly it wasn't stealing, and but it was a lot of, they didn't care about money. There was another thing that was really dumb. They were running this job. It was like their last job. They could see the writing on the wall. Well, there was no more jobs after this one. And they had welders working overtime and other personnel working overtime to get this job done, which was not unusual to work overtime. But the unusual thing was they didn't have any more jobs. So the question is, why are we working overtime? Well, it was decided to go ahead and continue working overtime because they were afraid that these personnel, welders and others, machinists, would find other jobs if they didn't get the overtime. If they didn't have that overtime coming in, plus the job's going to last longer if you don't do overtime. So there's more time for them to find another job. Well, none of them guys quit. And so after the job was done, they sat around for 3 months, didn't do anything, and got paid. And there was another thing, another fiasco was, and this was a couple situations where I said, hey, let's spend $600. And they would go, oh my God, we can't spend that kind of money. And really this happened twice. And then they would have the guys do the work. And they said, well, these guys aren't doing anything. So instead of buying this thing for $600, we'll have them make it. Well, it probably costed $6,000 by the time they got done making it. And it wasn't right. They didn't do it right, you know. But that's a little more opinionated on my side. That's a situation where that's not, I don't know what to tell you about that, except that it just happens, you know, they would spend such ridiculous amounts of money, and then if I said, let's spend $600 to buy something, I was like, no, that's not a good idea. Not $600, no. And I just thought of something else. Oh, I know another thing. Floor sweeper, I just remember two things. Floor sweeper and, you know, one of the installations I used to work at, they had mop buckets. Every building out on the dock, outside the building, would have mops and mop buckets, and they had racks to hang the mops up. And the mop buckets, they would turn upside down near the mop. You'd be like 4 to 6 mop buckets and mops outside of the building on the dock. And when those guys got downtime, like if a machine breaks, you call the mechanic to fix the machine, the whole assembly line stops, mop the floor, all right? And they would mop the floor with black water, but if you keep doing that every day, even with black water, it makes the floor cleaner. The floor gets cleaner. Well, these guys, this other place I was working, they didn't do that. And they bought a $16,000 machine. Similar, you may have seen one at Walmart. You know, when they drive that thing around and it kind of scrubs the floor a little bit. And then they didn't use it. And one problem was it would be parked somewhere. It was a rather large machine, bigger than probably what you saw. Kind of like a, what's that thing they use on the ice? God, I can't think of the name. I'll post it in. It's funny, Zimbabwe or something. Anyway, it wasn't that big, but it was kind of big. So anyway, you can't transport it from one building to another very easily. And so it wouldn't get used. And another time, I was in this one building and they had paper and cardboard boxes, stuffed with cardboard boxes. And the building was filthy, and all the cardboard boxes was filthy. I says, why don't you run that floor mopping machine? Well, they didn't want to do it. They says, oh, it'll get wet, you know, the boxes will get too much humidity. Well, this is freaking Kentucky. But anyway, there's one other thing. Oh, they had a machine to pick to sweep the road or something like this, or pick up nails in the road or something like this. And there was a problem with flat tires, which there's another big joke about that, which you have to sweep out the truck, but you don't have to sweep it onto the road. You can sweep it into a dustpan and a bucket. But that's a matter of low-level supervision if you let the guys just sweep the truck onto the road. That's ridiculous. But anyway, they had leased a machine. They didn't buy it. They leased a machine, and they didn't drive it. Nobody drove it. And they were paying every month a certain amount of money to lease, you know, to have this machine on site. They would pick up nails, they were getting flat tires, and nobody was driving the machine. And with that, I think you've heard the dogs barking. I think I'm gonna end.